What would you do if someone pulled a gun on you? I don't think any of us really know until we're actually put into that situation. Many years ago, it happened to me, and I was surprised by how I responded. In this episode of How to Train a Happy Mind, I share that terrifying experience and reflect on how an attitude of love and compassion, at least in this one very specific instance, may have saved my life. This episode is a recording of a talk and guided meditation I gave just a few days ago in our Train a Happy Mind community, which meets every Sunday morning for live discussion and meditation. If you'd like to become part of that community, you can learn more about it at trainahappymind.org. Before I play this episode, I want to offer a clear disclaimer. I'm not advocating in any way that anyone respond as I did in a situation like this. In general, personal safety guidance emphasizes that if someone threatens you with a weapon, the safest response is usually to stay calm and do what they ask. This story describes a very specific and unusual situation where what the person wanted would have caused even more harm. Every situation is different, and there's no single right or safe response. Please don't take this episode as personal advice about your own or anyone else's behavior. Instead, take it as a story, one that illustrates how we train our minds toward nonviolence, compassion, and love. Here's the episode. In these sessions, I often get to expand something, and now I'm expanding like a subtopic of a subtopic. We're in the Love and Compassion series, and I decided to elaborate on what are called the 6 perfections. I need another finger. Generosity, morality, patience, joyful effort, calm abiding, and insight, interdependence. And so we kind of got stuck on patience, which in a good way. Because at first I was going to do one session, and then, patience. There's my favorite book is called Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And it's a guide to living your life to benefit others. And it was written, 1,000 years ago. Such a good book. And there's an amazing story about how it was taught. Because everybody thought he was a bum. My parents like that word. People don't use that word much anymore, bum. But everyone thought he was a bum, like he was the worst monk in the monastery. And they invited him to give a lecture to try to kick him out of the monastery. They're like, listen, how are we going to get rid of this guy? Let's invite him to give a lecture, and he'll do so bad, we'll finally kick him out. So they invited him to give a lecture, and then his lecture was the book. It's like the best book ever written, in a way. So I'm doing a little bit of a commentary. I hesitate to call it that because I know what a good commentary is, but my own kind of personal commentary on a few verses of the Patience chapter. It's like the most famous chapter of one of the most famous books on this topic of love and compassion. And so it's broken down, love and compassion are broken down into categories, these 6 practices of a bodhisattva, a person who lives their life to benefit others. Patience doesn't have the definition you think it does, although it also encompasses what we think of as patience, but it's not returning harm is the definition of patience. It's the antidote to anger. One of the biggest things that makes you angry is when someone else is angry at you, right? So this is how to avoid that without being a pushover, without just sitting there and taking, you don't necessarily have to take it. You might need to change some things in life, like someone's parked in front of your driveway and you can't get your car out. You don't just sit there you ask them to move their car. And, there's higher levels of that. Now, the last thing I want to say, especially for new people, is that even just trying to antidote anger is already quite an advanced, difficult practice, just to realize that anger is a delusion, like to realize anger doesn't feel good. There is a truth that underlies anger. Like when you're angry, it's not for no reason. In general, it's for a really good reason. Something's wrong. Something needs to change. But then we exaggerate. And the Buddhist definition of anger is that we exaggerate the negative in the person we're angry. We're not usually angry at something besides the person. So we exaggerate the negativity of the person. We only see the negative usually when you're angry. Even your partner, if you ever get angry at your partner, like you can see how ridiculous this is, right? Because I see it. When I'm angry at my wife, it's like I only see the negative. in like the person that loves me the most in the world and has done the most for me in my life. Like that's crazy, right? So to recognize anger is a delusion, that it exaggerates the negative and it wants to harm. Like I want to say something that hurts my wife. Like, come on, what's going on here? It's definitely a delusion. So to recognize that and then cultivate the opposite. So that's already hard enough, but that's like the ground level. What we're doing is looking at the really advanced level. And in some ways, it's not necessarily even that any of us need to practice this, but it's sort of like a North Star. Like if you know the most extraordinary level of patience, it actually makes it easier to practice just normal patience, because you're like, well, I can't do that, but at least no, it's amazing that some people can. And it inspires me to just do the basics of getting along with the people around me, at work and so on. And that creates the cause for peace, you know? I've seen so many people ask the Dalai Lama. I just heard it again in a lecture, a couple lectures this week. How do you create peace in the world? How do we antidote war? I've seen people ask the Dalai Lama so many times. He said the same thing. Resolve the conflicts in your own life. Mic drop. That's it. There are other things you can do, writing letters, protesting, but the strongest cause isn't, because the world is made up of individuals and individual relationships. And the effect that has ripples out in ways that you can't fathom. So what I've been doing is reading the verses and then just talking about them because they're very deep and very inspiring. So let me start with, this is the 24th verse. I've just excerpted a few of them. Without thinking, I shall be angry. People become angry with no resistance. And without thinking, I shall produce myself. Likewise, anger itself is produced. Now, this is really deep. It's like, where does anger come from? Part of why we get really angry is because we think the person decided to be angry, that they chose to get angry and to annoy us, that it's all about me. It's all about me. I think it's one of the things that helped me get over anger the most at first was realizing actually it has almost nothing to do. Like I happened to be there. I happened to be there in that place for the person to get angry at. But the anger is like 99% on their side and has nothing to do with me. I'm reminding them of something, triggering something. There's habits and traumas and experiences in their own life. They're living out their own experience that's producing anger and is making them miserable. And I'm just happen to be there, to be the object of it for a moment. But what this verse, without thinking I shall be angry, people become angry with no resistance, right? Like it seems quite easy to get angry. Like it doesn't seem hard to get angry actually, right? For a lot of the time. So like what this bears on is a very deep question, which is free will, right? Like, I heard someone ask Venerable Rabina, she's one of my teachers who I really respect, Venerable Rabina Kurtan. I just saw her yesterday at some teachings here in Santa Cruz. And someone raised their hand at the end, they're like, do we have free will? And she said, well, let me ask you a question. The last time you got angry, could you just instantly decide, oh, I will not be angry? Most of us will say, no, that's not the case. We can't control it and it's lingering and we don't like it. It feels awful and it's destructive. It's destructive to ourselves. It's destructive to our relationships. So, the perspective from Buddhism is we don't. There is a way to have free will. I want to talk about it a little bit, but it's like we don't. If we can't decide how to control our own mind in this very basic way, like to stop something that's making us miserable, do we have free will? Do we have much free will? No, not really. So how do things happen, Like, we also don't believe it's like God's will, that's the Buddhist perspective. There's no God like that. So where do things come from? How do things occur? Two primary places. One is cause and effect, causes and conditions, that things come into being due to other things. And I'm not talking about something more mystical like Buddhist karma, like they might in the Buddhist way, but just in our everyday way of looking at things, like
things come into being because of other things that occurred earlier. I think if you look at the things that trigger you, that you get angry about, most of us on here, we're relatively mature in that we've lived many years already on Earth. And we can see like the things that trigger us, they generally kind of go back to our childhood, either to our childhood or to relationships. Like there are these formative experiences that there's certain things that really bother us. Like for me, it's my parents. My parents weren't necessarily like the nurturing, like caring container all the time. I was sort of set off on my own a lot. So I'm kind of triggered by like they wanted us to be independent. They were trying to be beneficial, right? They wanted us, they're like, we want to raise independent kids that can take care of themselves, like job well done. But also, I didn't feel cared for and nurtured a lot of time. And I left home when I was really early and I had a lot of responsibility when I was young that felt overwhelming. Um, so when someone to me is sort of like distant or not caring or a little bit feels remote to me, I start to kind of freak out a little bit and be like, because it reminds me of those things from when I was a kid, because I kind of seek out like the nurturing, caring people I can really, really trust. And I know we're going to take care of me and express that in words like, I love you, I'll take care of you. So we're all like that. And we get angry. Then I get angry. If I'm not getting that, I kind of freak out because it triggers those feelings from when I was a kid of, feeling not totally feeling safe and nurtured. So I think if each of us looks, this is where Western psychology really helps. If each of us looks to our childhood, like we find those triggers, it's great to understand why you get angry. Um, that doesn't necessarily help you antidote it, though, actually knowing why. This is why Western psychology generally fails. Sorry. Sorry, psychologists, that you need some kind of method to also like overcome. And there are methods. Some are somatic now, are really popular. So one thing that controls our behavior is cause and effect. Is all the totality of our experiences, our training, our family, our work, our relationships that have created these habits and triggers in our mind. Why do things happen? Number one, maybe the biggest one. The second one is delusions. That's like when you distill, like, what is it? There are ways to generalize these feelings. And the Buddhist version of it is, of course, the one that I'm, distilled into a secular way, is anger. We actually say aversion because it also encompasses fear and anger, fear, and worry. It kind of actually encompasses all three of those things. But let's just say anger for now because that's the one relating to patience. Delusions, anger, attachment, and ignorance, which is kind of self-centeredness, you could say. Those two things are what can control most of our behavior from the Buddhist psychological model. Cause and effect, conditioning, and then delusions. Now, that sounds a little disappointing to hear that. So then how do we control ourselves? This is what I've learned from Buddhism and from my own experience, is that this constructive free will, like free will in terms of being able to do good things for ourselves and for others, it does seem to exist, but it's kind of before the fact that in quiet moments, in this moment right now together is one of those moments. Like when we're safe, when we're contained, when we're in, like this is a safe space. But I like to say we're in growth. Like they say there's three kind of conditions for the mind, like comfort, growth, and panic. A lot of us, a lot of the world and us are in panic now, like a lot of the time. In this community, I like to keep us in growth. There's also calm, or another place when you're cooking, when you're in a safe space at home, when you're reading, watching Netflix, whatever. I like to keep our space mostly in growth. That's the purpose, is actually to have enough safety that you can open up your mind and think about ways of changing it, steering it toward the better. So this kind of constructive free will, what Buddhism teaches in my own experience is like, it does exist, but it's kind of like before the fact. Like right now, we're in a group talking about it, thinking about it. It's safe. It's like a laboratory for our minds, and in meditation, especially in meditation, because you can rehearse these difficult experiences and rehearse constructive ways of responding. And what Buddhism teaches is you plant the seeds for a constructive future in moments like this. and when you're meditating, by yourself or in a group. And so it's like, I feel like the free will, it's more like it, I really feel it's only in those moments because then you start to, suddenly you behave in a way that you're really proud of and that's really constructive. Like someone gets angry at your work and you're like, oh my God, I can see you're really angry. Instead of fighting back, like I found myself doing this, at work, a few years ago. And I was almost surprised at my own behavior. I didn't feel like I did it deliberately. It was just that I had rehearsed it, just like we're rehearsing now. And then it became a little bit of a growing pattern. And then all of a sudden I was presented with the thing I'd rehearsed, and my mind did the thing that was more beneficial, is to be curious, which we talked about a lot. That in some ways, curiosity is the opposite of anger, not patience, or curiosity is a different type of patience. So they say, one of the things they say in Buddhism is if you want to know your past, look to your present conditions, right? So if you're like a very patient, generous person, you know that in your past you were kind of, kind and generous and things that you created the causes. And if you find yourself quite angry and reactive, well, you were in situations that cultivated that, often coming from the outside, situations with your family, with friends, colleagues, work that, created this reactivity. So now we can't do much about that. But they also say if you want to know your future, look to your current behavior. So we're creating that. We can feel so great about this hour we spend together, right? Because this really is creating the seeds for a constructive future, a beneficial future, constructive ways of responding, that's neuroplasticity. That's why I repeat myself too. Repeat these statements, repeat the meditations, repeat stories, because they need to get ground into your mind. So we are responsible for our actions, but it's an illusion to think that we can control ourselves right at the moment things are happening. Like that's, I think, where we get really wrong and where Hollywood's all messed up, because Hollywood always says like, it's about the choices you make. Almost every movie, they're like, it's the choices you make. Not really. It's actually about how you condition your mind so that you make the right choices spontaneously when those opportunities occur. It's subtle difference, but it's a big difference actually. Um, And you think about it, like you can't just pick up a guitar and play like Eddie Vedder because you want to. You've wanted enough. No, you have to create the conditions. You have to have a music teacher, practice, learn the scales. If you want to run a 4-minute mile, you need the conditions, right? And many of them are impossible to get for like you have to have a certain have a certain level of youth and a certain type of body and so on. If you want to write a novel, you don't just want it enough or wish it enough and sit down and write it. You need to read other novels, study how writing works, have enough free time and wealth to be able to sit around writing for years. Many, many conditions need to come together to compose a great song, to get a PhD. It's like you need to create the conditions for these things to happen. Okay, the next verse. These conditions that assemble together have no intention to produce anything, and neither does their product have the intention to be produced. This is really wild. It's like, how the heck does reality work, right? Because if people get angry without wanting to be angry, it's like, what exactly makes it's such an unpleasant situation to be in? Like, why the heck do we get angry? And the conditions themselves don't have any motivation. Like we're saying, the causes and conditions make us angry, but they don't have any motivation to make you angry either. It's like the buck doesn't stop there. So it's like the product doesn't have the intention to be produced. It's like, where the heck do things come from? This is really, really deep and mysterious. And it's wonderful to think about it because it's getting towards emptiness, dependent origination. Like, I'll tell you, there's a more poetic quote that I like that's saying the same thing. Um, it goes like this. Um, Nothing to do or undo, nothing to force, nothing to want, and nothing missing. Amaho, marvelous, Everything happens by itself. It's the last part that's really important. Everything happens by itself. This is verse number 26. Everything happens by itself. I think about this all the time. Like, why do things happen? Yeah, causes, conditions. But there isn't really an actor. Like, there isn't really, it's very, very deep and profound. And you don't want to believe this. You don't have to believe this. And you don't want to believe this. You just want to ask the question, how do things happen? Especially, how do people get angry? That's what we're thinking about right now. This is about everything, but in particular, applied to anger. How do we get angry? It happens by itself. And, it happens. It's not quite true. Like it's a distillation of wisdom. Um, but the next part, okay, 31, this is verse 31. I skip a bunch of them. Some of them are a little more religious too, because they talk about other lives and things. So, and I'm talking about the ones that kind of impacted me the most personally too. Hence, everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. Having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena which are like apparitions. This is getting more and more subtle, right? Like we search and we search for the ultimate causes of our behavior, right? In the beginning of this, I was saying like, look, Western psychology, right? Look into your life and see the causes of you getting, like my dad, he had a dad that beat him. Like, look, what kind of trauma does that create, right? It's such a nightmare. Um, so yeah, look at that. But don't stop there. This is where Western psychology fails because you stop there and you're like, it's my dad's fault. It's not. There were other factors governing your father's behavior. Look at my father's father. He has a father who was never around. He had a mother who was mentally ill and suicidal. They handed him off to the nanny. He was raised by a black nanny. He became a civil rights activist because really the person he loved most was his black nanny. That was the only person who really loved him. So he kind of turned away from his family. He had negative feelings toward family, very positive feelings towards black people. And he became a kind of civil rights activist, very early civil rights activist, communist. That was the good side of my grandpa's behavior. The bad side is he copied his own, he kind of acted out his own feelings of abandonment and like beat his own kids and became an alcoholic. Everything's governed by other factors, but don't stop at your parents. It's not your parents' fault. It goes back and back and back, 1,000 I think it's like 10,000 generations of humans. Like, it's to the 200,000, 300,000 years ago. Like it goes back that far, and more. Nothing governs itself. Like we search and we search for the ultimate cause of our behavior and others. But when you do that, it's an infinite regress. Like keep looking. If you ever feel like you found ultimate cause, keep looking because you're probably wrong. You may not be. I mean, make your own decision. So in this quote, it says things are like apparitions. What does that mean that they're like apparitions? It's really, the most important word there is like. I know it's funny to say that because you can make a mistake and think they really are apparitions and they're not there at all. And that's not what it's saying. Like our feelings, our reactions, our experiences, they aren't actually ghosts or illusions. They're like them. It's like an illusion. It isn't an illusion. So there is something there. But it's so subtle and so much more insubstantial and so interconnected with everything that ever happened in the universe. And this is emptiness. Like this is dependent origination of how things truly exist. These topics can't help but start bleeding into the other topics because they're all interrelated, right? We're talking about patience, but it's actually, you have to talk about emptiness. So last part. This is the last one I want to do today, 33. So when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. That's that's the purpose of those last four. See, I'm putting these in groups, right? Because you want to hear those four. And then this is the most important one. It's like, there's no need to get angry. There's no need to get angry. Because everything arises from causes and conditions. And I wanted to tell a story because it's easy to get abstract about this. I almost never told this story, but I started telling it recently because the person it happened with died. Um, I'm an artist also. And I had my art studio was in this big building where this guy was a guard. And he and I became good friends. And he was a Vietnam vet, very, very traumatized, like so awful what he went through, so awful the things that he did. Like the things like that My Lai massacre in Vietnam, like that didn't just happen once. It's so bad and so awful. I mean, it's awful for the people, the women and children who got killed. And it's awful for people like him. Because he told me, he's like, I was sitting there, I was in front of a bunch of Vietnamese, like villagers, like children, women. They're on the radio. They tell me, kill them all. So what are you going to do? And he did it. He killed them. And I mean, it's awful for the people he killed, obviously, and their families. And it's awful for him. Like he's traumatized for the rest of his life. I only say this to help explain cause and effect. So um, one day I was working really late in my studio and I closed up. I came downstairs and there's a gated off area where we'd park. I came down, the gate was locked. I was the only car in there. And this guy, he lived in a trailer there. And he came out, he was wearing like his military jacket. And he came toward me, and I could tell two things right away. I could tell he was on some kind of drugs or alcohol, and I could tell he had a gun. And he was carrying some kind of gun. I could tell he had some kind of gun under his jacket. And he came toward me and he said, I really feel like I need to kill somebody tonight. And some people are always shocked when I laugh at these things, but I think a lot of you know, like laughter is a way of dealing with difficult situations. So I really feel like I need to kill somebody tonight. So, I look, I was like, there's nobody else there except me. And like, what am I going to do? And um, I did not make a decision, but somehow I did something. My body and my mind did something. And here's what I did is that I didn't run. There's like fight or flee, right? I didn't do those two responses. I didn't fight. I didn't flee. What I did was I stepped up towards him and I gave him a big hug. And I said, well, I'll tell you his name. I mean, he's dead now. His name's Curtis. I said, Curtis. I said, and then I kind of stepped back. I said, Curtis, can you open up that gate for me? I need to go home. And I felt the gun, when I hugged him, I felt the gun between us. It was like a Glock, like I could tell it's like this 9mm, I was like, Curtis, can you open up that gate for me? And he just kind of nodded. And he went and he opened up the gate and I drove out. And as soon as I got out, I was like, I was like peeling out. I was like pretty freaked out afterwards. And I called my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and I told her the story. But this is just to say, like, there's a lot to say. There's a lot to pick apart in that story. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not advocating that you do this. I don't think this is like a universally applicable wisdom. It was just a very specific situation that happened to work out for me. But I would say these verses saved my life because I think if I had run away, he would have shot me. If I had fought, he definitely would have shot me. Because he's trained. Like this person went through like military training, then the military experience. It's like we're seeing it now in Minnesota. These guys they were trained to kill. Then they're facing situations that remind them of combat, and then they behave like a combat situation and commit atrocities. And I'm not advocating this for any activist, anybody else, just I'm telling you my own experience. But this saved my life because I spontaneously had a compassionate, loving response instead of a violent one or a scared one. And again, I am not saying you should do this. I'm not saying anyone should do this. I'm just saying this unique single experience for me helped. And hopefully you'll never face something like that. Hopefully it's just, getting mad at your partner or your boss yelling at you or something like that. So anyway, I wanted to tell a real story because it's easy to get abstract with these things. Okay, I'm gonna lead the meditation now. So settle yourself into meditation posture. Especially straighten your spine. That's the most important part. Relax your face, tilt down your head, half close your eyes. And set a motivation, to be able, without any judgment or negative feeling toward myself, to gently work on those reactivities, those responses that aren't helpful, that especially anger, if that's a problem you have, to become patient, to find a wise way to respond to situations that would normally make me angry without denying the truth that something needs to change, but to get past the delusion of exaggerating the negative in others, wishing to harm. That I would like to be patient, I would like to be wise, I would like to be loving and kind, and to know how to shift the world, to shift my own mind, to shift the world. And the way to do that is gently, and not with anger, with love, compassion, wisdom. And then think of anybody who is patient and is effective. Of course, I think of like the Dalai Lama, or Desmond Tutu, Martin Luther King Jr., who's we just celebrated, Gandhi, and also people in your own life. As there's often the most compassionate people we know are like nurses, doctors, mothers, social workers, activists. One of my dad's friends, is very wealthy, and he spends his money and time taking care of kids who are alone on the streets and often getting involved with drugs or getting pregnant early. And, it's nice. There's so many people like this in the world, and we each know at least one. To think of people like that in your life who make a decision to, they've cultivated. It's not easy actually doing that, but day by day, moment by moment, they're cultivating the constructive, beneficial emotions, reactions, and letting go of the destructive ones, and nourishing themselves, with exercise, meditation, yoga, analytical meditation like we do, ways of steering yourself towards your best self without ever judging yourself for not being perfect, which none of us are. So then bring your mind to your breath, and let's focus on the breath just for 1 minute to stabilize our mind. We almost exclusively do analytical meditation, but we do 1 minute of stabilizing meditation, and sometimes a little bit within the meditation sessions, which is important too. And bring your mind to your breath, and just focus on your breath for 1 minute, gently bringing your mind back when it strays away, and with this sense that your breath is your life too, which can keep you more interested in your breath if it gets boring. For 1 minute, my breath is my life. And just take a look at your mind and your body now after 1 minute of imperfect meditation on the breath. It's like, wow, that had a big effect actually, didn't it? Even if I get distracted a few times, like, and it can be nice to remind ourselves we could always meditate for a minute like that, you know. We all have an extra minute, instead of take 1 minute out of the 2 hours we spend on social media or something. Do that every day or when you have a free moment. So now we move into the meditation on patience. Think about the last time you got angry or a time you got angry that you can remember. And think, at that moment, did I have the power and the freedom to just say, I don't want to be angry and stop? Was that possible? Did I do that? In general, no. So why did I get angry? And at first you might think because of somebody else, because of the thing I saw on the news, or because the thing the person said to me, or that someone didn't do something they promised to do. But is that really why? Keep looking. Other people have people do the same or worse things to them and don't get angry. So it's not universal that those situations would cause someone to get angry. It's just me. And so what makes me that way? What happened in my life to make those particular situations vexing? I like that word, vexing. It generally has something to do with your childhood or your relationships. A way that you didn't feel loved and supported or felt hurt. That now is very triggering when people do things that remind me of those childhood situations when I didn't have power. I didn't have any power or control and I was hurt. Or in a relationship, early relationship, when I was hurt. So it's causes and conditions that cause me to get angry. And then these delusions that ripen of anger, to recognize anger as a delusion, it exaggerates the negative, it wants to harm. That's not a healthy state of mind. It's not a state of mind we want to be in. Doesn't mean there aren't things we want to change in ourselves, in the world, but anger is, that aspect of anger, the deluded aspect of anger is totally unhelpful, harmful. And yet we do have control in a quiet moment just now. In some ways, maybe this is the only place we have control, is right now when it's safe, when it's quiet, when it's calm and we have a mind of growth. Try to plant the seed for a different way of responding. How could I have responded in that moment of anger that would have been beneficial for me, that person, that situation? One way is actually just to say you're angry. I'm with my daughter this weekend, actually, and I saw her. She was feeling quite frustrated and overwhelmed and yesterday. But then she just said it. I was so proud of her, actually. It's hard for me to do that, but we were in the car and she just said it. She just said, I'm feeling so frustrated and annoyed right now. And I was like, wow, you're a lot more mature than I am, to be able to do that. To not identify, she didn't lash out at me. She just said, I'm feeling so frustrated and angry. That's a great response, right? Just to name your feeling and not act it out. I'm feeling so frustrated. It actually made me feel so compassionate. Oh, what can I do to help you? Let's take a break. Let's just sit. Why don't you read for a while? I'll hang out. That's great. Just to name your feeling is one great response. No. Or to be curious, put yourself back in that situation and reflect, to say, oh, I can tell if someone's angry at you. oh, I can tell you're really angry right now. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, what's going on for you? Don't take it personally, right? Just see it as their delusion, their experience. How can, it's hard generally, but how can I de escalate the situation? Be curious. Hey, what's going on for you right now? I can tell you're really angry. I've done it. When I've done it, it works because the people want to be heard. And they're like, yeah, I am angry. And here's why. And they might blame it on you still, but just keep listening and asking questions. And often, eventually, it just, it exhausts itself. People need to be heard, even though it's hard because they're exaggerated. They're blaming you often for something that's not your fault. But if you can kind of be the better person, be the patient person, that can diffuse it too. So you see, what we do now is we're rehearsing. We're rehearsing doing that, imagining we could behave in that way. And this is how we create the cause to do it in the future. We are responsible for our actions, but it's an illusion that we can just control them in the moment. Right now, this is the special moment, maybe the only moment when we have free will, we have control. Let's really savor that, take advantage of it, and create the cause. Next time I get angry, may I respond with curiosity, reflection, connection. And then see how these causes and conditions have other causes and conditions. That person's parents are parents. That person's relationships are relationships. Their bosses are bosses. Well, our parents had parents. Our bosses had bosses. It goes back 300,000 years to all of humanity. Nothing to do or undo, nothing to force, nothing to want, nothing missing. Everything happens by itself. Really wild. It's really wild how things happen. Everything's governed by other factors. So why get angry if everything has a causes going back infinitely? Why get angry? We search for the ultimate cause of our behavior, but there's nothing there. It goes back forever. They're like illusions, but they aren't illusions. Everything depends on something else. This is how things truly exist. So if you see an enemy, even a friend, committing some kind of harm, when we think these arise from conditions, I won't get angry. And is it really even possible that I could stay in a happy frame of mind, like Shanti David says? Really? Why would I be happy with someone being angry at me? Well, this is the advanced practice because it gives me the chance to practice patience. I want to be patient. I want to be curious. I want to be kind and connecting. The only way I can grow that muscle is if people try my patience. If they say rude things to me, if they don't give me what I want, that's my chance to practice patience. Thank you, person. It's an extraordinary attitude. But I need them. I need the people that try my patience, even the worst actors in the world, because they remind me I haven't perfected patience. I do get angry. And this gives me like the laboratory, like someone trying to run in a 4-minute mile. You have to practice, 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 race against other people. Train your body, train your mind. Very advanced practice, but it's worth at least admiring those that have practiced it and to respect it, just to respect it. And so by doing this meditation, um, may these ways of responding ripen in my daily life with my partner, with my colleagues, with the news, especially. I think probably the thing that makes many of us the most angry right now, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. May I see these frustrating situations as a laboratory to perfect patience, to strengthen my patience, my compassion, love, my curiosity, my ability to connect with others, with myself, and to appreciate the causes and conditions. You know that everybody, if you knew the story behind everyone's life, their actions would make perfect sense, right? The worst actors in the world, like some of them, we know their story, but you can imagine how their parents treated them, how their colleagues in work, how the military, those in the military, you know, how they were taught to obey orders, to respond instinctively with violence. Like, you see how things happen. It's sad. It's sad. You become more sad than and compassionate than angry because you see it's almost inevitable the way people act. The only way I know out of it is what we're doing right now. I don't know another solution. To train our own minds toward wisdom, patience, compassion. And so we aspire to do that, bring out our best qualities and those of others. And we can come out of the meditation.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of How to Train a Happy Mind. If you'd like to explore these ideas further, you'll find guided analytical meditations, the podcast, and information about the Train a Happy Mind community at howtotrainahappymind.org. How to Train a Happy Mind is a nonprofit project of a skeptic's path to enlightenment. The podcast is offered freely and without ads, thanks to the support of listeners. If you'd like to support us, visit our website where you can offer cash, cryptocurrency, or simply just send a message sharing how the podcast has helped you. Thanks to Isabella Acebal for marketing and production on this episode. We wish you a wonderful day.